Welcome back, guys. This is the creative side of week 4. Here's your supplies list. For your first object lesson, you need a really big spoon, ideally like a serving spoon size, but it needs to be like a heavy metal. If you have one that's ladle size, that would be even better. And then you need some kind of string. Also, you need something that can make distracting sounds. So a phone works, an Alexa works, whatever you happen to have on hand. Your second one we're going to talk about is what happens to Enoch, that transition that happens. So for this one, you need balloons. I used punch balloons like this that you get at the dollar store, and they're a little bit bigger and more dramatic. But if you have just normal balloons, those will work as well. And then you need a lighter and a candle because, you know, it's Guts and Glory week on the chart, which means we're going to do something a little more daring. That's your second one. The third one, all you need are pencils. A pack of 10 or 12 will work great. If you have really coordinated kids, you might need more, but they don't have to be new pencils. You could pull some out of your junk drawer and they'll work just fine. Okay, that's it for your supplies list. Let's get into the details. One of my favorite verses this week. It almost sounds like object lessons in a verse. This is in verse 27 of Moses 6, where he talks about the wicked and how their hearts have grown hard, their eyes can't see afar off, and their ears are dull. Now, we've done some object lessons about prophets and hearts being hard, and we've done some about prophets seeing things that we can't see, but I hadn't talked about ears before, so this kind of piqued my interest. I started to study a little bit about prophets in the past, in our day, who've talked about ears being dull, and I found two themes. One is that they talk about dullness comes from having too much other noise, conflicting sounds that you allow into your life that compete with truth, and then also disconnecting yourself from sources of truth, like prophets. That's where dullness of hearing comes from. So I wanted to be able to play that out for my kids so that they could see how they could hear the Lord better. And there's a really simple way to do it. So this is essentially, you're going to make a gong out of a spoon. So you'll just give your kids a normal soup spoon like this and have them tap it against something hard. In fact, it's even better if you can add a bunch of distracting sound. So turn on your Alexa a little bit loud or play some music on your phone and ask them to tell you how loud. If they had to rank it from a 1 to a 10, how loud is the tap sound that they hear? It should make a little ding sound. And they can probably make it out depending on how loud you turn up your music. But have them rank it. And then you're going to turn off the music and you're going to tie a string to your spoon. Basically, it's just a knot. It's a string that you tie in a knot. You just want to have enough length of string on it that they have a good amount to work with, maybe 18, even 24 inches or so on either side. You also want the weight of the spoon, the bigger part, to be at the bottom. So just tie your string at the neck of the spoon so that it kind of holds itself in place. You're going to have them take this string and kind of wind it around their fingers on either side. So when I handed this to Violet, I had her just twist like this. But they're going to need to be able to tap this against a hard surface. So you kind of want to be able to give it some length. So have them twist at the top of the string rather than closer to the spoon. And then you'll just ask them to put their fingers in their ears, almost like they're putting in AirPods or headphones. And as they put their fingers in their ears and then bend over and tap that spoon against something else, it will sound weirdly loud. Because the vibrations travel up the string and go directly into your ears, you actually hear almost like a gong. You know, like in the movies when they hit a great big metal gong? That's what it will sound like. And especially if you've turned the sound down, it'll sound even louder. So you want to talk about what that string might represent. If the spoon represents the words of God, the string to me is our connection to our prophets. They are our way to hear him more clearly. In fact, I love that there are so many videos that teach this concept, how the prophets and apostles and the women leaders of the church, how they hear him. And it's supposed to teach us to hear him better. That, I feel like, is evidence of this object lesson kind of in reality, that as we listen to the prophets, especially our prophet, President Nelson, as we keep our connection to him tight, we can hear things others can't. In fact, I would take time to point out that the sound of the banging of the spoon actually doesn't change. It's just the fact that we've tuned in more deeply. So others around us might say, that spoon's not very loud. But if you've got the strings in your ears, you can be like, no, it's like a gong. And I really feel like that's what happens in our world, especially if you have teenagers who are hearing a lot of conflicting voices. You want to talk through what are some ways we can reduce the sound of everything else? What are some ways we can find quiet, where we can find peace? What sources of media or things are actually causing conflicting sound, so we're having a hard time hearing the truth? And then talk about how you can amplify the good. This is how you can put those strings directly into your ears. What are some ways they can do that better? If it's listening to conference talks more often, if it's reading their scriptures with more intent, if it's, praying for help on who can guide them in the right way, what could they do better to increase their ability to hear him? And I think if you kind of walk through the steps of the object lesson, hopefully they'll get the understanding that they can hear him better. And by turning to our prophets, just like the wicked had to turn to Enoch to hear him better, it opens up opportunities to really come to know what he sounds like. And there's power in that. Enoch's transformation from a lad who's basically afraid that people will make fun of his speech to a prophet who can speak and make people tremble because of his words is something I think every kid needs to study. I love the story of Enoch. So my hope with this object lesson is that it invites you to have a lot of discussion about it, because every kid understands their weaknesses really well, but they often don't see their potential, especially not the way God does. So hopefully this will give you a chance to teach it. Basically, you want to start by giving every kid in the room a balloon. Whatever balloons you have on hand will be fine. And you want to tell them to make it as impressive as they can. What would make this balloon impressive? And if your kids are anything like mine, that means they're going to try and blow this balloon bigger than their head, as big as possible. You might burn through a few of them as they erupt and they figure out which size is the perfect size. But talk to them about what makes that balloon impressive, right? It's big and it's full of air. And then talk about how the Lord sees things. Often the prophets that we read about in the scriptures are not big balloons. They are more like this. This is how Enoch felt at that moment in time. He felt weak. He felt like he didn't have much to offer. Joseph Smith felt very similar when he talks about being an obscure boy. We see it with Moses, who's afraid that he doesn't understand things. You see it with Jeremiah. You see it with Nephi, who's nervous about going in to get the plates. There are loads of stories in the scriptures, and I give you some in the notes to talk about how these prophets feel. So once you talk about how the Lord sees this, when the Lord sees an empty balloon like this, he sees potential. He sees something that can be filled. And because Enoch has a work to do, just like Moses did and Joseph did, and all these prophets from the Book of Mormon and the Bible and the New Testament, they all have a work to do and they need to be filled. This is when you're going to take your balloon. Your kids will probably have tied off some of theirs, and that's totally fine. Now you take another one and you're going to fill it about a cup or so of water. And then you're going to take your balloons to the fire. So for me, I lit a candle that had a little bit of distance between the wick and the rim. And this is why. Your kids are basically going to take their air inflated balloons and they're going to just let it rest on top of the candle. And you'll see really fast what happens to normal balloons when they're set on top of a candle. This candle and the heat is supposed to represent adversity, hard things that happen. And every other balloon within like 2 seconds will burst and scare everybody in the room. But then you're going to take your water-filled balloon and you'll talk about how that balloon represents Enoch and how because he turned to the Lord first, he felt like this. And the Lord said, "Let me fill you." And he then trusts and he lets the Lord teach him, which is the equivalent of getting full of a little bit of water. And then you place that balloon in the same spot on the candle and amazing things happen. It doesn't burst. In fact, it actually puts out the candle. That's exactly what happens with Enoch. He teaches these people and they change. In fact, he's the only prophet that we know of who was able to convince an entire city to be righteous and they never fall back. We'll learn a little bit about that next week. But that's if you notice when you put the balloon with water on top of the candle, it actually extinguishes the flame and it's able to lift the candle because of the power that's in it. So when God talks about how he sees potential. In fact, all the prophets lately, when they talk to the youth, they talk about their divine nature and their divine destiny, that they're needed and that they're intended to do great things. This is what he's talking about. You're not going to look big and impressive to the world in this state. Enoch didn't either. But what you look like to the Lord is someone who has potential to be filled. And when we lean in and we trust in that potential and we let the Lord fill us like Enoch did, you can do incredible things, things that no one else can accomplish. And in fact, you were sent here to do just that. I loved how this week's study mirrored so much of what we learned in the Book of Mormon. In fact, one of the spots I love is that the reason I think that Enoch is able to make that leap and choose to be filled up by God and trust that his worries and his insecurities will be overcome is because of the teachings he learned from his father. I think that's why that verse is in there, that it talks about how Jared taught Enoch in all the ways of God. And so then in that critical moment, Enoch could say, okay. Despite being insecure, he says, okay. It reminded me a little bit in the Book of Mormon with the sons of Helaman. Remember, they're in that crisis moment of battle and Helaman's nervous and he turns to them and they say, we don't doubt. We know God will protect us because our mothers taught us that. I love the parallel between those. And I think what then Enoch teaches everyone else is teach your children the plan of salvation. Teach your children the doctrines of Christ, because if they know those things, if they really know them, they'll have everything they need, no matter what the opposition is throwing at them. So I felt like in order to really honor what Adam through Enoch was teaching us in this, it would be to take some time to help our kids know these doctrines as solidly as the sons of Helaman did, as solidly as Enoch did, help them to know. And I thought we should come up with a game to pull that off. So essentially for this object lesson, you just need pencils. The printable this week are their pencil wraps that you will wrap around your pencil and kind of so that they can read it. That's the idea. Because the game they're going to play is to throw pencils in the air and try to catch them. If you haven't seen this before on social media, it's a classic challenge and it's hard. So the idea behind this is you have two sets of pencils. So there's 2 pages to the printable. The first set is multicolor. They'll look like this. And the idea behind these is that they'll learn a principle of the plan of salvation on each of these pencils. So you'll learn the blue one is kind of an introduction to all of it. The purple one teaches you about the creation. The green one teaches about the fall, and the 2 red ones teach about the atonement of Jesus Christ. Those are the big pillars of the plan of salvation. Then as they go a little bit further, they'll also learn about the doctrines of Christ. This is how we access the atonement that saves us, that sterilizes us, like we talked about in the insights. It gives us the opportunity to return to God because we've used the atonement. So that's what the doctrines of Christ are all about. So there's 5 of each. The game is a really simple one. The idea here is that as they play together, they'll learn these doctrines really quickly because they have to say them over and over and over again. So when you start, you're going to have one of your kids begin, and they're going to grab the blue pencil. They're each numbered, like where you would see a 2 on a normal pencil, you'll see a number so you can get them in order. But they'll start with the blue pencil that introduces the plan of salvation. So you'll have them read both sides. The main idea is in all caps, and then there's some additional information in the italics. But you're going to have them say it out loud to the group and then place it on their hand just like this. They have to try and balance it for a second, and then they have to toss it in the air and catch it. It's really easy with just one pencil. The challenge comes when you add a few more. So once they've got that one down, then you're going to take the second pencil. In this case, it's purple. This one teaches about the creation. They're going to add that to their pile on their hand, and now they have to toss 2 in the air and catch them. Then the third one comes along. Over the course of 3 or 4, you'll see it gets more and more challenging to pull this off. In fact, with my older kids, I asked them to have to toss the pencils at least as high as their eyebrows, which made it a lot harder. But the idea is if they fail, if they drop a pencil, then it's the next person's turn. They start back again with just the blue pencil, read it out loud to the group. Every time someone plays, every time someone takes on this challenge, they can increase the ability of the whole class to understand the plan of salvation. Once they can get 5 pretty easily, then you move on to the doctrines of Christ. So you talk about baptism, faith, repentance, all those key doctrines that we learned about in the Book of Mormon, they're all here as well. Because the way we access the atonement is by using these doctrines of Christ. This is the how. And the plan of salvation is the what, why we're here, and what the God's plan is. So hopefully by the time they get to the 10th pencil, they've got it pretty much down. In fact, if you got really coordinated kids, you could add more. You could add 10 or 12 pencils and see how many they're able to get to. If you have a big seminary class, you might want to make a few batches of these so that you can have different teams competing at the same time and learning these key doctrines of Christ. But hopefully in the course of playing over the next, 10, 20 minutes of tossing pencils in the air, they'll have fun, but they'll also gain an understanding of these very simple, very clear doctrines. And what we've learned from these scriptures and lots of others is that these doctrines, if they're really understood at pivotal moments in their lives, will come back to them. The Spirit will bring these back to their remembrance, and they'll know who they are, why they're here, and what the Lord expects of them. And that's incredible doctrine to know solidly. So we got to do everything we can to teach it. That's it for week 4. Guys, enjoy your study. This is a really good week. It's short. There's not that much to cover. So this should be a good one where you can go deep. For sure, you don't want to miss the story of Enoch. It will bring back so much good feelings that you had with the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants. It'll all come washing back over you. I promise you're going to love it. If you want to talk more about this or get some of the insights that maybe I didn't have time to get in here, you're welcome to join me for the live. That's Instagram, 2 o'clock on Mondays. That's Mountain Time. And that's where I'll kind of go through the insights, go through the object lessons, and answer any questions that you might have. If you have other questions more immediate than that, please put them on the discussion boards. That's where I can see and respond, and ideally other people see and respond even faster than me. So it's a good way to kind of engage with the community. But otherwise, I hope you really enjoy Moses 6. It's one of my favorite chapters of all the Pearly Great Price. So take some time, enjoy it, and I'll see you guys on Monday.